There's a particular kind of horror that could only be generated and really belongs to the internet, not the kind that borrows from cinema. The jump scares, the shadowy figures, the slow burn dread inherited from 40 years of genre grammar. It's something different. It started as a photograph, a single image of an empty office space, yellow carpeted and fluorescent lit, that was uploaded to a forum with a caption suggesting that if you clipped through reality at the wrong angle, you might end up there. No visible monsters, no explanation, and no protagonist with childhood wounds waiting to be healed. Just a place that felt profoundly, inexplicably wrong, and the creeping certainty that nobody was coming to find you. Kane Parsons, then a teenager, turned that simple image into a series of found footage YouTube shorts that accumulated millions of views before most studios had even registered the concept. But how can you adapt an idea that was made for short attention span audiences into a feature film and still preserve the kick, the impact? Is it even possible? Well, that's what you'll find out today in this video. I'm Pedro from Vinyl and Celluloid, and this is my review of Backrooms. Hollywood continues its never-ending journey of seeking the next big thing and the latest voices to monetize. It has found them in Reddit-generated creepypastas and liminal spaces. The kind of internet-born dread that accumulates millions of views before anyone in a studio has thought to ask why. The original image spread because it tapped into something older than language. The strange familiarity of a space that should mean nothing, a corporate corridor, a waiting room, a back office, transformed into something terrifying by the simple suggestion that it shouldn't exist. The Kane Pixels series understood something most feature horror films have forgotten, that the monster is the punctuation mark, not the sentence. The industry finally noticed. In Kane Parsons, a 20-year-old creator who had turned a single unsettling image of an empty yellow office space into one of the most viewed horror series on YouTube, the industry found its latest prodigy. Armed with a reported $10 million budget, Parsons was given the opportunity to transform Backrooms from a collection of viral shorts into a feature film. In doing so, the film runs headfirst into the same problem that has haunted every internet adaptation before it, expanding a concept built entirely on mystery, ambiguity, and atmosphere into a conventional narrative. See, the original shorts worked because they resisted explanation. Just an impossible place, and the creeping certainty that reality had quietly come undone. The moment that 10 minutes of existential dread needed to become a 110-minute story, the concept-turned movie was already in trouble. Horror's oldest truth is that what we imagine is almost always scarier than anything we can be shown. The film spends its entire runtime proving that point, unfortunately, from the wrong side of the argument. The question was never whether to expand the idea as well. The real question was what kind of story you'd tell when the source material had virtually no story at all. But before I decompose the lore-expanding title, let's go over the usual recap session. Clark Harper is a middle-aged furniture store owner. His life has stalled. He knows it, his therapist knows it, and the film makes sure you know it too, in case the depressing furniture store didn't already communicate quiet desperation with sufficient clarity. During an electrical inspection, he comes across something unusual. An impossible network of interconnected spaces existing outside normal reality. Corridors that shouldn't exist, geometry that refuses to behave, and the persistent suggestion that the ordinary world has a back exit nobody told you about. His fascination becomes obsession. The boundary between his life and the labyrinth begins to blur. So far, so promising. What the film does with this premise is the first key issue. A24 being A24 could have only distributed a movie that offers a very specific nail to their sole creative hammer: trauma. The therapy sessions that bookend Clark's journey make this painfully obvious. Backrooms aren't just a place Clark discovers. They are a setting where his psychology has apparently been waiting for. A physical manifestation of everything unresolved in a man who sells sofas for a living and cannot quite explain why that feels like failure. The creatures he encounters inside are not random horrors generated by an impossible environment. They are, in the film's own logic, something far more familiar, something that reflects him back at himself. It is, in other words, exactly the film you feared it to be. Now, the challenge facing Parsons was obvious from the moment the budget was confirmed. Nobody was going to pay for a cinema ticket to watch a feature-length version of a grainy 90s VHS video of nothing but yellow corridors for 2 hours. Expansion was inevitable. The original Backrooms mythology was deceptively simple. First came the image, an endless fluorescent-lit maze suggesting reality could be accidentally escaped. Then came the internet lore. Thousands of anonymous contributors building levels, entities, and theories around a single unsettling photograph. Parsons' YouTube series added a third layer. Government contracts, scientific experiments, and the idea that humanity had discovered a doorway into an impossible space. Crucially, these additions expanded the mythology without solving it. The rooms remained unknowable. The film introduces a played-out fourth layer. Personal trauma, psychological manifestations, and a conventional emotional arc. Expansion was necessary, but the route Parsons chooses fundamentally changes the source of the horror. The original image asked what if reality itself was broken. The movie replaces that with what if the protagonist cannot escape his own past. The result is lackluster. Call it the Freddy Krueger principle. The more a horror concept is explained and repeatedly exposed, the less frightening it becomes. But if the direction was wrong, the execution made it worse. Backrooms looks expensive. The liminal aesthetic is faithfully recreated. Parsons clearly understood what the space should look like. The problem is that atmosphere alone cannot carry a feature once the mystery has been removed. As a result, we have a case of style over substance. The visuals are doing all the heavy lifting, whilst the screenplay actively undermines what they're trying to create. Every scene that lingers in the corridors earns its dread. Every scene that builds on the corridors loses it. One film is being made by the design team, and another one is being created by the writers. Backrooms as a location demanded restraint, patience, and courage to let an audience sit with the unresolved and eerie atmosphere. The screenplay demands explanation, emotional arcs, and the kind of resolution that makes studio executives comfortable. The moment Clark and Dr. Klein are both inside the space together, the location stops being a fantastical space and it becomes a set. Two characters with a history and things to say to each other, requiring a space to accommodate them. The corridors that worked as an environment instantly become a backdrop. Force them to coexist and you get a film that looks like it understands its source material, but behaves like it doesn't. And nothing proves that faster than what the film does with the monsters. The creature reveals suffer from the same fate as most of the other elements in the movie. In the original shorts, they appeared sparingly, as evidence that something was wrong. Almost incidental to the real horror of the environment itself. The film promotes them to center stage, and the more screen time they receive, the more their seams show. They end up coming across as laughable, like all the supposedly scary elements in Ari Aster's overrated Hereditary. What the shorts implied with a half-glimpsed shape retreating around a corner, the film delivers in full close-up, repeatedly, until the sense of threat evaporates entirely. By the third act, the creatures provoke something closer to mild irritation than dread. Not in a charming, practical effects B-movie way that sort of earns its own kind of affection. Really in a way that makes you aware of the budget going to the wrong places. Fear thrives on anticipation. Once you have seen a monster clearly enough to notice its flaws, it belongs to a completely different genre. The lesson Hollywood learned from the likes of Jaws, Alien, and even the Blair Witch Project discarded to cater to an audience that wants to be spoon-fed. Backrooms were never about what you could see, yet the film spends $10 million making sure you could. Still, the monsters aren't the only things left stranded. Renate Reinsve and Shuitel Ejiofor arrive with enough credibility to ground even the strangest material, and the film simply wastes both of them. The screenplay, if we can call it that, gives them jobs to perform rather than play to people. Go through the mythology, advance Clark's emotional journey, and provide dramatic structure. Neither character feels like a real person encountering an impossible situation. They feel like narrative functions with only one job: keep the plot moving. That is exactly what the script requires. Reinsve, in particular, deserves better. She's a performer capable of extraordinary emotional precision, as anyone who saw The Worst Person in the World and Sentimental Value already knows. Here, she's flat. Not because she cannot do the work, but because the script simply shoehorned her into the trauma architecture the film cannot function without. Every scene she shares with Clark exists to service his emotional journey, rather than establish her as a person. In that sense, she's not a character. She's a mechanism for delivering the backstory the film decided it needed. A title built around an atmosphere rather than a character has no space for the people inside it. Clark Harper's trauma backstory was never designed to be dramatically interesting. It simply existed to justify the runtime. And the script, once again, delivers mechanism for an environment that stopped working the moment someone decided it needed a story. Now, Kane Parsons built something genuinely unsettling on a shoestring and a single image. And this is not nothing. In fact, the problem is not his talent. The true issue lies with what happens when an industry that runs on explanation gets hold of something that only works without one. Backrooms asked a question nobody could answer. The film gives you an answer anyways. And in doing so, joins a long distinguished list of things Hollywood understood well enough to buy, but not quite well enough to leave alone. The film's commercial success, alongside projects such as Obsession, will undoubtedly fuel another round of industry headlines announcing a new horror movement. Studios will once again convince themselves that internet folklore, Analogue Horror, and liminal spaces represent the future of the genre. But horror history is littered with concepts that briefly felt revolutionary before quietly disappearing. I mean, ask around and you'll have a tough time finding anyone who can say anything positive or even remembers Slender Man and Skinamarink, titles that were both briefly treated as the future of the genre. Backrooms may prove to be no different, because what made the concept memorable was never the lore, the creatures, or the explanations. It was the unsettling possibility that somewhere behind reality's wallpaper sat an endless room that nobody could understand. And the more the film attempts to explain that idea, the more it has in common with every horror movie you've already forgotten.